I am Joshua, 32 years old, and my own family publicly humiliated me at my mother's birthday dinner, treating me like a worthless charity case while my brother flaunted the wealth I secretly gave him. Before I tell you about how I legally ripped his entire tech empire out from under his feet in a single morning, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The clinking of heavy crystal glasses, the scraping of silver forks against porcelain plates, and the low, pretentious hum of wealthy people trying to impress each other filled Megano's. It was arguably the most expensive Italian restaurant in the entire city, the kind of place that doesn't put prices on the menu and requires a reservation 6 months in advance. We were there to celebrate my mother's 60th birthday. As was the unspoken tradition in our family, I was seated at the very far end of the long mahogany table. It was the designated blind spot, right next to the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter rushed out carrying a tray of steaming pasta, the heavy door would bump against the back of my chair. I didn't complain. I just quietly shifted my water glass closer to the center of the table so it wouldn't spill onto the pristine white tablecloth. At the absolute head of the table, commanding the room like a king holding court, sat my older brother, Carter. He was wearing a custom-tailored navy suit that hugged his shoulders perfectly, a silk tie, and a watch that probably cost more than what he assumed my entire yearly salary was. His wife, Chloe, sat right next to him. Her fingers were heavily decorated with diamonds that caught the dim restaurant lighting, and she spent most of the evening swirling a glass of deep red wine and looking bored. Mom and Dad sat flanking them on either side, practically glowing with pride every single time Carter opened his mouth. They looked at him the way people look at a winning lottery ticket. "So, the Series B funding just officially closed this morning," Carter announced, his voice booming effortlessly over the background jazz music playing softly from the ceiling speakers. $15 million in fresh capital. We are projecting $50 million in revenue by the fourth quarter. The board of directors is absolutely thrilled. We are completely dominating the market share. Dad slammed his heavy hand flat on the table, grinning from ear to ear, his eyes shining with absolute adoration. "That is my boy. I always knew you were going to build an empire, Carter. I told everyone at the golf club. I always knew it." Mom reached over, her gold bracelets clinking together, and affectionately patted Carter's cheek. "You work so incredibly hard, honey. You deserve every single bit of this success. You are such an inspiration." I took a slow, measured sip of my ice water. The condensation dripped down the side of the glass onto my fingers. I didn't say a single word. I just sat back and watched them perform this familiar play. Then came the dessert menus. A young waiter, looking thoroughly exhausted and overworked, handed the leather-bound booklets out to the table. Mom adjusted her reading glasses, scanning the options, and then casually glanced down the long length of the table at me. "Joshua, do you want some of the tiramisu?" she asked, her tone carrying that slight edge of pity she always used when speaking to me. "Or maybe just a scoop of vanilla gelato?" Before I could even open my mouth to answer her, Carter leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked loudly. A familiar, deeply arrogant smirk spread across his face. He looked at me, his eyes traveling up and down my simple button-down shirt, and then he looked around at the rest of the table to make sure everyone was paying attention to him. "Does he even have money for coffee?" Carter asked, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. The entire table went completely, uncomfortably silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then, the ripple of cruel laughter started. First, Chloe giggled, pressing her linen napkin to her painted lips. Then my younger sister, Emily, let out a nervous, high-pitched chuckle while looking down at her plate. Even my Uncle Robert, a man who always prided himself on being the moral and religious compass of our family, let out a deep, rumbling belly laugh. "Carter, please stop," Mom said, but her voice lacked any real authority, and the corners of her eyes were crinkled. She was smiling. She always smiled when Carter made his little jokes at my expense. It was just how our family bonded, by stepping on me. "I'm totally serious, though," Carter continued, leaning forward and resting his elbows aggressively on the table. He was fully playing to his captive audience now. Joshua, honestly, what is your salary at that shipping warehouse? Like 30,000 a year? Before taxes. He didn't wait for my answer. He turned to his wife, gesturing with his fork. Babe, isn't that roughly what we spend just on the insurance and maintenance for your Porsche? Chloe flipped her blonde hair over her shoulder and offered a condescending smile. Just about. Plus the premium detailing. Cars like that are expensive to keep on the road. My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. I kept my face entirely blank, a skill I had perfected over the last decade. Something like that, I replied quietly, keeping my voice perfectly steady. See, this is exactly what I am talking about, Carter said, throwing his hands up in the air as if addressing a crowded auditorium. No ambition whatsoever. No drive. You never even asked for a promotion. I was making 6 figures by the time I was 25. I built a massive tech company entirely from the ground up with my bare hands. Meanwhile, Joshua is still scanning cardboard boxes and driving a forklift at 32 years old. Fine is what you say when you have completely given up on life. Uncle Robert adjusted his silk tie, leaning over his empty plate. You know, Joshua, there are state programs. You could go back to community college. Carter could probably get you an entry-level job in his mailroom if you actually showed a little bit of initiative. You can't just float through life. I am doing just fine, Uncle Robert, I said, staring directly into his eyes until he looked away. Carter let out a sharp, barking laugh that echoed in the dining room. Look at this place, Joshua. This is Mom's 60th birthday dinner, a milestone event, and you didn't even offer to split the bill with me. Do you all know why? Because their standard espresso here is $8. He can't even afford to participate in this family's lifestyle. The heavy blanket of humiliation hung thick in the air. The waiter returned, nervously holding a notepad, and asked who wanted coffee with their dessert. Carter smoothly ordered a round of expensive, imported espressos and after-dinner liqueurs for the entire table. Then, he specifically pointed a finger directly at me and told the waiter, "Nothing for him. He's on a very strict budget." More laughter erupted from my family. I felt a hot, prickling flush of intense anger start at the base of my neck and crawl up to my scalp. I looked at my mother. She was busy admiring Chloe's diamond necklace, completely ignoring my public execution. I looked at my father. He was nodding along in agreement with Carter, taking a sip of his scotch. Not a single person sitting at that table saw me as a living, breathing human being with feelings. They saw me as a prop, a convenient punchline, a miserable failure they could use to contrast against the shining, golden success of Carter. Underneath the heavy linen tablecloth, hidden from their judgmental eyes, I slipped my smartphone out of my pocket. I unlocked the screen, opened my secure messaging app, and found the encrypted thread with Andrew, my senior wealth manager. My thumbs moved quickly and with absolute precision over the glass screen. Initiate the exit protocol on the next tech solutions position. All of it. First thing Monday morning. No delays. I hit send. I slid the phone back into my pocket, the cold metal pressing against my leg. The waiter returned minutes later and carefully set a tiny, steaming white cup of espresso directly in front of Carter. The rich, dark aroma of roasted coffee beans filled the space between us. Carter picked it up by the delicate handle, taking a slow, highly theatrical sip, keeping his cold eyes locked entirely on mine. He genuinely thought he had completely crushed my spirit. He sat there, convinced he was the untouchable king of the world, untouchable and supreme. I looked right back at him, right into his smug eyes. For the first very time all evening, a genuine, relaxed smile crossed my face. Little did my arrogant brother know, that $8 cup of coffee he just denied me was about to cost him his entire life's work. To understand how I ended up sitting at that table as a secret millionaire, you have to go back 10 years. The sky was a heavy, unforgiving gray, spitting a miserable, freezing rain on the day of my grandmother's funeral. I stood near the back of the muddy cemetery, my cheap suit soaked through, watching the dark, wet soil being shoveled over her casket. Grandma was the only person in the entire family who genuinely saw me. She never once compared me to Carter. She never made me feel like I was a mistake just because I didn't want to be a loud, aggressive corporate shark. A week after the funeral, we all gathered in a stuffy attorney's office for the reading of her will. The room was tense. Carter was already mentally spending what he assumed would be a massive windfall. But when the lawyer handed out the paperwork, the room went dead silent. Everyone was utterly shocked to find out she had bypassed my parents and Carter entirely. She left her entire life savings directly to me. The inheritance was exactly $200,000. To my parents, it was just a nice little nest egg, something to put down on a modest house. To Carter, who was already chasing high-risk tech ventures and blowing cash on expensive dinners, it was mere pocket change. He actually laughed in the lawyer's office, calling it cute. But to me, holding that cashier's check, it was the heavy, solid foundation of my entire future. While Carter was busy racking up massive credit card debt to desperately maintain the illusion of a wealthy, successful lifestyle, I took that inheritance and completely vanished into the background of their lives. I rented a tiny, drafty one-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood. I bought a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a massive dent in the passenger door and peeling paint. I wore plain, unbranded t-shirts and faded jeans. And every single day, while my family thought I was just wasting away playing video games, I rigorously studied the financial markets. I read every book, analyzed every trend, and taught myself the brutal mechanics of wealth building. I started slow. I invested heavily in stable, dividend-yielding blue-chip stocks. When the real estate market took a brief dip, I bought cheap, distressed multifamily properties, fixed the plumbing and drywall with my own bleeding hands, and flipped them for pure profit. Once I had built a massive cash reserve, I aggressively moved into private equity and venture capital. Over a grueling decade, through relentless discipline and calculated, high-leverage moves, I turned that initial $200,000 inheritance into a staggering $80 million diversified portfolio. But I never breathed a single word of this to my family. I knew exactly, with terrifying certainty, what would happen if I did. The dynamic would become highly toxic overnight. Suddenly, Uncle Robert would be knocking on my door, demanding a high-risk loan for his consistently failing hardware store. Emily would cry and demand I instantly pay off her massive student loans and fund her kids' future college fund. Mom and Dad would suddenly expect me to purchase them a beachfront retirement home in Florida. And Carter? Carter would manipulate the situation, legally and emotionally, to find a way to make my hard-earned money his money. So, I needed a permanent disguise. I went out and got a grueling part-time job at a massive logistics and shipping warehouse. The physical labor was intense, the hours were terrible, and the salary was barely above minimum wage. But the company offered incredibly robust health insurance, which I needed. More importantly, it provided the absolute perfect cover story. My family saw the scuffed steel-toed boots, the dirty high-vis vest, and the exhaustion on my face, and they instantly stopped asking questions about my life. They also completely stopped asking for financial favors. It was the perfect, impenetrable shield. This system worked flawlessly until exactly 4 years ago. Carter had just arrogantly quit his comfortable corporate job to start Next Tech Solutions. He had massive, world-changing dreams, a violently inflated ego, and absolutely zero actual capital. For 6 brutal months, he aggressively pitched his cloud-based software to every single venture capital firm in the state. Every single one of them laughed him right out of the boardroom. His product was considered far too niche, his financial projections were labeled pure fantasy by serious analysts, and his founding team had zero track record of success. He was drowning fast. The bank was actively threatening to foreclose on his massive, over-leveraged house. The stress was tearing his life apart, and he was facing a very messy, highly publicized divorce from Chloe if he couldn't rapidly provide the luxurious lifestyle she fiercely demanded. Chloe was already speaking to a lawyer about custody arrangements. I remember sitting in my worn-out, second-hand armchair in my quiet apartment, looking at the dismal financial reports of his failing startup that I had secretly acquired through a private broker. Despite Carter's massive arrogance, the core software his quiet friend Dylan had coded was actually brilliant. It had real potential to disrupt the market. It just desperately needed the right financial backing and strategic guidance. I sat there for hours in the dark. I couldn't just stand by and watch my own brother lose everything. His home, his wife, his mind. But I also knew his toxic pride would absolutely never allow him to take a single dime from his loser little brother who worked in a warehouse. He would rather go bankrupt than admit I was more successful than him. So, I made a secure phone call to Andrew. We immediately set up an opaque shell company called SV Capital Holdings, operating as a deeply buried subsidiary of my main investment firm, Sterling Ventures. Everything was completely buried under complex layers of legal proxies, offshore routing, and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. SV Capital swooped in at the midnight hour and offered Carter a massive lifeline. $800,000 in immediate seed funding to keep the lights on and pay the servers. In exchange, SV Capital took a controlling 60% equity stake in Nextech Solutions. Carter was so desperate, so terrified of failure, he signed the legal papers so fast the ink physically smeared on the page. He genuinely thought he had miraculously convinced some shadowy, brilliant Silicon Valley billionaire to believe in his grand vision. He had absolutely no idea his financial savior, the master of his universe, was the exact same guy loading heavy wooden pallets on the freezing graveyard shift. Over the next 4 highly stressful years, as his company miraculously gained traction and grew, I authorized multiple massive rounds of funding through secondary disguised partnerships. My total cash investment eventually reached exactly $4.7 million. Because of my heavy, unshakable backing, other skittish investors felt incredibly safe jumping in during the later rounds. The company's valuation skyrocketed into the stratosphere, hitting nearly $80 million. On paper, my 60% controlling stake was worth over $46 million alone. I was the invisible, silent engine running his entire life. I bought the house he slept in. I paid for the Porsche his wife drove. But a very strange, deeply ugly thing happened as Carter got rich. The more money my firm pumped into his company, the worse he treated me. It was as if his rapidly rising net worth required him to push me further and further into the dirt to maintain his fragile psychological balance. Every single family gathering, every holiday dinner, became a theatrical stage for him to brutally belittle my warehouse job, mock my old car, and insult my cheap clothes. And for 4 years I took it. I swallowed the bitter insults because I genuinely loved my family, and I valued my quiet peace above my ego. I truly thought enduring his abuse and keeping the massive secret was the necessary price I had to pay to keep the family intact and my brother off the streets. But that terrible night at the Italian restaurant, watching my own mother smile warmly as he viciously mocked my simple ability to buy a cup of coffee, something fundamental and permanent inside me finally snapped. It wasn't just Carter anymore. It was all of them. They had willingly created a highly toxic ecosystem where my basic human worth was entirely dictated by the luxury logo on my car and the fabricated title on my business card. Carter desperately needed a brutal, life-altering wake-up call. He needed his entire reality shattered. And I was the only person walking the earth with the absolute financial power to deliver it. At exactly 9 a.m. on Monday morning, the air was thick with the smell of diesel exhaust and damp cardboard. I was standing on the freezing concrete loading dock of the warehouse. The heavy, rhythmic rumble of 18-wheelers backing into the bays filled the morning air, masking the sound of my phone vibrating aggressively in my front pocket. I pulled my heavy leather work gloves off, my fingers stiff from the cold, and answered the call. "Good morning, Joshua." Andrew's calm, perfectly measured voice came through the phone speaker. He sounded like he was sitting in a soundproof room, miles away from the noise of my reality. "I have the Nextech Solutions file open on my desk. Before I press this button, I need verbal confirmation. Are you absolutely 100% certain you want to proceed with the total divestment? Series C funding is on the horizon. If you hold your position for just another year, your equity could easily double." I watched a tired coworker driving a yellow forklift drop a massive, heavy wooden pallet onto the concrete floor with a loud crash. "I'm sure, Andrew. Pull the plug. Drain it." "Understood," Andrew said. His tone instantly shifted from advisor to pure, ruthless corporate executioner. Exercising the immediate exit clause will trigger catastrophic, immediate financial consequences for the company. As the majority shareholder, violently removing your $4.7 million of operating capital will instantly breach their core operational liquidity covenants. They will have exactly 30 days to secure full replacement capital, or the hostile liquidation protocols will activate automatically. The firm will be dismantled. Draft the legal notices, I instructed, my voice unwavering, and make sure the legal language is as cold as ice. No room for interpretation. No room for negotiation. I hung up the phone, slid it back into my pocket, pulled my leather gloves back on, and went right back to loading boxes. Across town, in a massive, glass-walled corner office overlooking the entire city skyline, the financial bomb detonated. Later that week, I found out the exact details of how it went down from one of the terrified junior analysts who jumped ship. Carter was right in the middle of a highly arrogant marketing presentation when his lead corporate lawyer burst through the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. The lawyer didn't knock. His face was the absolute color of wet ash, and he was sweating through his expensive shirt. The lawyer marched right up to the front of the room and handed Carter a single, terrifying sheet of heavy stock legal paper. It was the formal, irrevocable exit notice from SV Capital Holdings. Carter snatched the document, annoyed at the interruption. But as his eyes scanned the text, his hands started to shake violently. The ceramic coffee cup sitting on his mahogany desk actually rattled. The legal notice didn't give a polite reason. It didn't offer a friendly meeting to discuss terms. It didn't offer a negotiation phase. It just coldly stated, in brutal legal terminology, that the majority shareholder was immediately divesting all operational funds and demanding full, complete repayment of $4.7 million within exactly 30 days, per the master shareholder agreement he had signed 4 years ago. It was a corporate death sentence. Within 2 agonizing hours, the devastating news leaked out of the executive suite to the Series B minority investors. Venture capitalists are exactly like great white sharks. The very second they smell a single drop of blood in the water, a violent feeding frenzy begins. If the main financial backer, the mysterious entity that confidently held 60% of the company, was suddenly packing up and fleeing in the middle of the night, it signaled a catastrophic, hidden, terminal failure within the company. By noon, panic had completely consumed the building. 3 different minority investors had already contacted their legal teams and filed emergency injunctions to freeze their remaining funds. Dylan, Carter's brilliant co-founder and lead software engineer, stormed past the receptionist and kicked the door to Carter's office open. "What the hell did you do?" Dylan screamed, slamming his heavy laptop down onto Carter's pristine desk, cracking the wood polish. "SV Capital is out? They are pulling almost $5 million in pure cash. We don't have that. We spent the entirety of the last funding round on the new server infrastructure and your ridiculous, massive billboard marketing campaign." Carter was hyperventilating, his chest heaving, his custom-tailored suit suddenly feeling like a suffocating straitjacket. "I don't know. I swear to God, Dylan, I didn't do anything. We hit all our key metrics. The quarterly numbers are totally solid. I'm calling them right now. There has to be a mistake." He frantically dialed the private liaison phone number for SV Capital. It rang twice and went straight to a cold, generic, automated voicemail. He threw his phone against the wall. He called his lead lawyer back. The lawyer, his voice trembling, told him he needed to immediately start preparing the paperwork for a Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing to protect his personal assets from the fallout. At exactly 1:15 p.m., my phone vibrated intensely in my pocket. I stepped away from the loud conveyor belt and looked down at the cracked screen. It was Carter. I let it ring 3 full times, letting him sweat, before I finally pressed answer. "Hey Carter, I'm right in the middle of a heavy shift. Make it quick. My supervisor is watching." "Joshua." Carter's voice was completely unrecognizable. It was high-pitched, incredibly frantic, and entirely stripped of the sickening arrogance he had displayed at the restaurant. He sounded like a terrified child. "Joshua, man. Everything is falling apart. Something really, really bad is happening at the office. I leaned my back against the cold, rough brick wall of the warehouse, listening to the panic in his breath. What are you talking about? Didn't you just brag about closing $15 million? My main investor. Carter choked out the words, sounding like he was on the verge of throwing up. SV Capital. They are pulling out. All of it. They are demanding $4.7 million in pure cash in 30 days. If we don't pay them, they have the legal right to liquidate the entire company. We're dead, Josh. We are completely, totally dead. Wow, I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat, utterly devoid of any sympathy. That sounds incredibly stressful. Stressful? Joshua, it's a catastrophic disaster. For years of my blood, sweat, and tears, my entire house is put up as collateral on the initial business loans. Chloe's car is leased directly under the company's credit. I'm going to lose everything I own. He took a deep, ragged, desperate breath. For a long second, there was absolute dead silence on the line. Only the sound of his panicked breathing. I knew exactly, with terrifying precision, what was coming next. Listen to me, Carter stammered, his pride completely breaking down. Do you have any savings? Anything at all? I know you don't make much at the warehouse, but maybe you have some secret emergency funds? A few $1,000s? Just to help me cover the basic employee payroll this week while I try to figure this nightmare out. I looked down at the deeply scuffed, dirty steel toe of my cheap work boot. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the question almost made me laugh out loud. The man who had publicly shamed me 48 hours ago was now begging me for pennies to save his empire. Carter, I said very slowly, deliberately letting the silence stretch out to maximize the sting. I work in a warehouse. Remember? I can't even afford an $8 cup of coffee. I heard a sharp, painful intake of breath on the other end of the line. The realization of what he had done hit him like a physical blow. Right? God, right? I'm sorry. I'm just losing my mind here. I don't know what to do. Good luck, Carter, I said coldly, and firmly pressed the red button to end the call. I slid the phone back into my pocket and walked back into the loud, chaotic warehouse. The storm had officially made landfall, and it was beautiful. By Wednesday morning, the absolute panic had violently infected the entire family network. My phone blew up with an endless stream of terrified messages. Mom left 3 incredibly frantic voicemails, her voice trembling and cracking with tears. Joshua, please, you have to call me back immediately. Your brother is in terrible, terrible trouble. The lawyers are talking about seizing his assets. He might lose the big house. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. We don't know what to do. Even Chloe called me. Chloe, the woman who couldn't even be bothered to learn my correct last name before the wedding, was openly sobbing into the phone. She wasn't crying for Carter's dream. She was crying because the bank had already sent warning letters regarding the immediate repossession of her beloved Porsche. The grand, shimmering illusion of their flawless, ultra-wealthy life was violently shattering into pieces in real time, and they had absolutely no idea how to handle the incredibly sharp edges. They were bleeding out socially and financially. Behind the heavily guarded doors of Next Tech Solutions, the company was aggressively tearing itself apart from the inside. Dylan, who was always significantly sharper and more paranoid than Carter, flat out refused to accept the sudden, unexplained exit of their main investor. He hired an incredibly expensive, ruthless private forensic accountant to deeply trace the hidden communication lines and routing numbers of SV Capital Holdings. On Thursday morning, as I was eating a cheap bowl of oatmeal, Andrew called me on my heavily encrypted secure line. Joshua, we have a slight, potentially volatile complication, Andrew reported, his tone tight. Nextech's co-founder, Dylan, has been aggressively digging through the dirt. He traced a very minor, obscure tax filing anomaly from 3 years ago. He knows definitively that SV Capital isn't a massive Silicon Valley firm. He traced the specific IP footprint of the initial wire transfers. He knows the money originated from a local private wealth account located right here in your city. Does he have a name? I asked, looking out the smeared window of my small, cramped apartment, watching the morning traffic. No, Andrew assured me quickly. The proxy wall I built is solid iron. But he knows the investor is local. He is currently screaming at Carter in the office, aggressively pushing him to scour his local networks, demanding to know exactly who Carter pissed off in this town. He thinks Carter insulted a local billionaire. I smiled a slow, dark smile. The heavy walls were rapidly closing in on Carter. The deep paranoia would be eating him alive from the inside out. He was probably sitting at his desk, mentally reviewing every single country club interaction, every incredibly arrogant comment he ever made to a local businessman at a charity gala, frantically wondering who was currently, systematically destroying his life. He looked everywhere, but he never, ever once looked down. He never looked at the brother standing in the dirt right beneath his expensive leather shoes. Unable to cope with the mounting pressure, Mom called a mandatory, emergency family meeting for Friday night at her house. It was a crisis summit. Before I left my apartment for my parents' house, I sat at my small, scratched kitchen table with my laptop open. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark room. I typed out a highly secure email to Andrew. Andrew, draft a formal, legally binding buyout offer. Tell Next Tech Solutions that SV Capital is willing to offer a deeply discounted exit. We will accept $3.2 million in cash to walk away clean and release our entire 60% equity stake back to the founding partners. They still have to aggressively find the bridge financing within the remaining 30 days, but this significantly lowers the financial hurdle. Andrew called me back within 2 minutes, his voice laced with confusion. Joshua, respectfully, that is a massive $1.5 million haircut on your initial principal investment. You are giving away money. Why on earth are you offering them a discount when you hold all the cards? Because, I said, my voice hardening into steel, I don't actually want to completely destroy my brother's entire life. I want to utterly destroy his toxic ego. This massive discount is the bait on the hook. If the number remains too high, he just gives up, files for bankruptcy, and plays the eternal victim. If I strategically lower it to $3.2 million, it gives him a tiny, agonizing sliver of hope. It forces him to stand up and fight for his life. Understood. It's a psychological play. I will send the offer immediately. One more thing, I added. My heart beat a little faster, thumping against my ribs. When you send the official term sheet to his lawyers tonight, completely remove the proxy shield. Put my real, legal name on the ultimate beneficiary line. Full, unredacted disclosure. Andrew paused. I could hear him taking a breath. Are you absolutely sure, Joshua? Once I press send on that email, the truth is out. There is absolutely no putting the ghost back in the machine. Your life will change. Send it at exactly 8 p.m. I commanded, and closed the laptop. I grabbed my keys, walked out to the dimly lit parking lot, and got into my dusty Honda Civic. The old engine sputtered slightly before finally catching. I gripped the cold, hard plastic of the steering wheel, feeling the worn texture. For 10 long, exhausting years, I had completely hidden my true self, my true power, to protect my family from the corrupting influence of money. Now, I was going to use that exact same money to violently force them to see the truth. I drove across town, watching the neighborhood's transition from working class to upper middle class, until I reached my parents' house. The large driveway was completely packed. Carter's gleaming Porsche was parked haphazardly on the manicured front lawn, a clear sign of his panicked state. Uncle Robert's luxury sedan was blocking the front walkway. I parked down the street, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked slowly up to the massive oak front door. I stepped into the living room. The atmosphere was incredibly, suffocatingly grim. Felt like walking into a wake. Mom was sitting rigidly on the floral sofa, clutching a damp tissue in both hands. Dad was pacing frantically back and forth by the unlit fireplace, rubbing his temples furiously. Chloe sat curled up in a large armchair, her expensive makeup heavily smudged around her eyes, looking like she had aged 5 years in just 4 days. And Carter. Carter looked entirely, fundamentally broken. The sharp, tailored suit from the restaurant was gone, replaced by a stained, wrinkled gray hoodie and sweatpants. He was hunched over the glass coffee table, staring blankly at the hardwood floor. His hands were buried deep in his unkempt hair. He looked completely defeated. "Joshua," Mom said weakly as I walked into the room, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're late." "Sorry," I said casually, taking a seat on a stiff, uncomfortable wooden dining chair tucked away in the far corner of the room. Traffic was bad coming from the warehouse. "Well, now that we are all finally here," Uncle Robert said, standing up and trying to take charge of the room with his usual booming, authoritative voice. "Let's review the hard facts." Carter stopped staring at the floor. "What is the exact situation?" Carter slowly, painfully lifted his head. His eyes were deeply bloodshot, with dark, heavy bags underneath them. "We are dead. The firm is completely dead." SV Capital flatly refused to negotiate an extension. The Series B investors are currently preparing massive lawsuits against me personally for gross misrepresentation of financial stability. I have exactly 2 weeks before the bank initiates proceedings to seize the house. "There has to be a way out of this," Dad insisted, stopping his frantic pacing and pointing a finger at Carter. "You built this incredible company, Carter. You are a genius. Can't you just go out and find another investor?" "What do you call them?" "An angel investor." Carter let out a bitter, incredibly hollow laugh that sounded like scraping metal. "Nobody invests millions in a burning building, Dad. SV Capital was our massive anchor. Without their backing, we look like a complete scam. We need $5 million in pure cash just to keep the lights on and buy them out. Where the hell am I going to get $5 million? The bank literally laughed in my face this morning." Uncle Robert sighed heavily, crossing his arms and looking directly across the room at me. "It's a terrible shame we don't have more financial resources in this family. If certain people had actually applied themselves in life instead of settling for mediocrity, maybe we could pool our money together to help." I looked right back at him, my face a mask of absolute, unreadable stone. "Are you looking at me, Uncle Robert?" "I'm just saying, Joshua," Robert said, shaking his head with profound disappointment. "Your brother is facing total financial ruin. This is a massive family crisis. And what do you bring to the table? A warehouse salary? You can't even afford to buy him a cup of coffee. You are a completely useless spectator in your own family's tragedy." Chloe sniffled loudly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "It's not fair. We worked so incredibly hard for our lifestyle." I slowly checked my cheap digital watch. It was exactly 7:59 p.m. "You're right, Uncle Robert," I said softly, my voice easily cutting through the thick, toxic tension in the room. "I am just a spectator. But sometimes, the spectator has the absolute best view of the game." At exactly 8 p.m., a sharp, incredibly loud ding echoed through the silent living room. It was Carter's phone, resting face up on the glass coffee table. Part 5. Chow Treo, Su That Bung No. Target. 1,500 words. Carter violently flinched at the sudden sound of the email notification. He stared at the phone as if it were a live grenade. He slowly reached out and picked it up with badly trembling hands. "It's from the corporate lawyers," he whispered, his eyes frantically scanning the bright screen. "It's a direct message from the SV Capital legal team." The entire room collectively held its breath. The silence was deafening. Mom leaned forward so far she almost fell off the sofa, her hands clasped tightly together in desperate prayer. Dad completely stopped breathing. Even Chloe sat up perfectly straight, her eyes wide with desperate, animalistic hope. "What does it say?" Dad demanded, his voice cracking with anxiety. "Read it." Carter's eyes darted rapidly back and forth across the screen, reading the dense legal jargon. They are officially offering a discount, a buyout clause. If we can somehow secure $3.2 million in bridge financing within the deadline, They will fully release their 60% equity and walk away clean. They are actually giving us a chance to survive. Oh, thank God Almighty! Mom cried out, bursting into loud, hysterical tears of pure relief. See? I told you it would all work out. 3.2 million is so much less than 5. You can find that, right, Carter? You have so many rich friends. Carter didn't answer her. He was completely frozen, staring at the very bottom of the long email. His skin rapidly drained of all color, turning a sickly, terrifying shade of pale gray. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His hands started shaking so violently that the heavy smartphone slipped right through his sweaty fingers and clattered loudly onto the glass coffee table. Carter, Chloe asked, her voice tight with rising panic. What is it? What else does the email say? Why do you look like that? Carter slowly, mechanically lifted his head. He didn't look at his panicked wife. He didn't look at our desperate parents. He looked straight across the room, past the coffee table, directly into my eyes. SV Capital. Carter choked out, his voice barely a raspy whisper. The email. It includes the formal, unredacted legal disclosure of the ultimate beneficial owner. Who is it? Uncle Robert demanded impatiently, stepping forward. Do you know them? Is it someone local? Can we call them to negotiate the price down even further? Carter swallowed hard, a visible lump moving in his throat. A single bead of cold sweat rolled slowly down his temple. He slowly raised a trembling arm and pointed a shaking finger directly at me. It's him. A heavy, utterly suffocating silence dropped over the room like a lead weight. It was so terrifyingly quiet I could actually hear the low hum of the refrigerator running in the kitchen down the hall. What on earth do you mean, it's him? Dad asked, thoroughly confused, looking back and forth between Carter and me. Carter picked up the phone again, his eyes wide with a terrifying, reality-shattering realization. He read the final, bolded line of the legal document aloud, his voice cracking on every syllable. Let it be legally known that SV Capital Holdings is a wholly owned, direct subsidiary of Sterling Ventures. The sole proprietor, chief executive, and ultimate beneficial owner of all held assets is Joshua. Mom let out a nervous, highly inappropriate little laugh. That's a typo. That's a ridiculous mistake. It must be another Joshua. There are millions of Joshuas in the corporate world. It lists his exact home address. Mom, Carter said, his voice breaking into a sob. The crappy apartment on 4th Street. It lists his social security number. It's him. It's our Joshua. Every single head in the room instantly swiveled toward me. I didn't move a single muscle. I didn't break my intense, cold eye contact with Carter. I slowly leaned back in my uncomfortable wooden chair, crossed my arms over my chest, and waited. Joshua, Dad said, his voice loud, demanding, and laced with absolute shock. What the hell is going on here? Tell me right now this is some kind of sick, elaborate joke. It's not a joke, Dad, I said, my voice completely calm, level, and devoid of any emotion. I am the majority shareholder and the supreme financial controller of Next Tech Solutions. Uncle Robert scoffed loudly, throwing his hands up. That is physically impossible. You work in a filthy warehouse. You drive a piece of junk Honda. Where in God's name would you get almost $5 million in pure cash to invest in a tech startup? I got exactly $200,000 from Grandma 10 years ago, I explained, speaking slowly and deliberately so they could process every single word. I didn't immediately blow it on flashy sports cars or oversized, heavily mortgaged houses like some people in this room. I invested it. I compounded it relentlessly. I built a private equity firm. Today, my private portfolio is conservatively worth approximately $80 million. Chloe let out a sharp, choked gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. Her eyes were completely dilated, staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. 80 million, Mom whispered, staring at me like I was a terrifying alien that had just dropped through her ceiling. 4 years ago, I continued, keeping my eyes locked dead on Carter, refusing to let him look away. When you were completely bankrupt, when every single venture firm in Silicon Valley laughed you right out of the room, you were sitting on this exact same sofa, crying like a child. You were going to lose everything. Your house, your car, your wife. So, I set up a secure shell company. I authorized an $800,000 wire transfer. I saved your life. Carter's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would shatter. A thick blue vein pulsed angrily on his forehead. You were my angel investor? This entire time? Every single time I bragged about my brilliant Silicon Valley backers. You were bragging about me? I finished his sentence, my voice dripping with cold satisfaction. The brother you relentlessly mocked for his warehouse salary. The brother you deliberately humiliated at dinner over an $8 cup of coffee. Why didn't you tell us? Dad yelled, his face turning an angry, mottled red. Why would you maliciously hide this from your own flesh and blood? We could have. He suddenly stopped himself, violently cutting off his own sentence as he realized exactly what he was about to say. You could have what, Dad? I challenged, my voice rising slightly, echoing off the walls. Asked me for a massive handout? Expected me to completely fund Emily's lavish lifestyle? Expected me to endlessly bail out Uncle Robert's failing business ventures? I hid it because I knew the exact second you found out I had real money, I would instantly stop being a son, a brother, and a nephew. I would become nothing more than an ATM machine to all of you. I stood up. The wooden chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. I was no longer the quiet kid in the corner. I owned the room. I was perfectly happy to stay hidden in the shadows, I said, looking around the room at the pale, utterly shocked faces of my family. I was happy to let you play the big shot, untouchable CEO, Carter. I didn't care about the public credit. But you couldn't just be successful and be happy, could you? You had to be exceptionally cruel. You had to use your fabricated wealth as a weapon to make everyone else feel incredibly small. You used my fake poverty to stroke your own massive ego. So you deliberately destroyed my entire company just to teach me a lesson? Carter yelled, tears of absolute rage and profound humiliation springing to his red eyes. You tanked 4 years of my life for petty revenge? I didn't destroy your company, I fired back, my voice commanding the space. I just took my own money back. I realized that my financial investment was heavily funding a monster. I don't invest in CEOs who treat human beings like garbage. It's incredibly bad business, Carter. Carter fell back heavily onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. He was sobbing openly now, the untouchable golden child, completely broken and exposed. I just formally offered you a buyout at $3.2 million, I said coldly, looking down at him. That is a massive, incredibly generous discount. I am handing you a literal lifeline, Carter. But you are going to have to deeply humble yourself. You are going to have to go out there, admit to everyone that you lost your main backer, and beg for bridge financing. You are going to have to actually work for it, for the first time in your life. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please like the video and leave a comment below to let me know you've been with me. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The heavy silence that followed my speech was thicker and more oppressive than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. The fundamental dynamic of the room had shifted permanently. The toxic power structure of our family, built and reinforced over 30 long years, had just been completely vaporized in less than 5 minutes. Mom started crying openly, loud, wrenching sobs that ruined her carefully applied makeup. She reached out a trembling, desperate hand toward me. Joshua, please. We didn't know. We had absolutely no idea. We thought we were just teasing you at dinner. We are family, Joshua. Your own blood. You can't do this to your brother. Please, just give him the money. I looked down at my mother, feeling a profound, bone-deep sense of exhaustion wash over me. Teasing is supposed to be funny, Mom. You were laughing with him while he humiliated me in public. You endorsed his cruelty. You rewarded it. Uncle Robert nervously cleared his throat, adjusting his collar. All his previous bluster, all his arrogant authority, had completely vanished. He looked at me nervously, like a terrified peasant looking up at an angry king. Joshua, listen to me. $80 million. That is incredible. Truly, it is a testament to your hard work. You are a financial genius. But surely, with that kind of immense wealth, you don't actually need to force Carter to go out and find $3 million in a panic. You could just gift him the shares. Keep the family peace. Be the bigger man. I let out a harsh, dry laugh that held absolutely no humor. Keep the peace? The peace where Carter gets to be an absolute tyrant and I get to be the family's designated punching bag? No, Uncle Robert. The endless bailout days are officially over. I turned my absolute attention back to my brother. Carter slowly wiped his wet face with the back of his hoodie sleeve. He looked up at me, his eyes red, swollen, and utterly defeated. For the first time in his entire life, there was absolutely zero arrogance in his gaze. Only raw, unfiltered fear and desperation. I don't have it, Carter whispered, his voice shaking. You know I don't have $3.2 million, Josh. The banks won't touch me right now. My credit is frozen. I can't do this. You have a network, I replied coldly, showing no mercy. You have Dylan. You have other tech founders you've met at your fancy galas. Sell the massive house. Sell Chloe's Porsche. Liquidate your personal assets and put your own skin in the game. That's exactly what a real CEO does when his back is pushed against the wall. Chloe let out a strangled, horrified sob at the mere mention of selling the Porsche, but she didn't dare say a single word in protest. She looked utterly terrified of me, shrinking back into her chair. You have exactly 30 days, Carter, I stated, my tone finalizing the absolute terms of his survival. If the money isn't sitting in the Sterling Ventures escrow account by exactly 5 p.m. on the 30th day, my lawyers will immediately initiate the hostile liquidation of Next Tech Solutions. Everything you built will be sold off for scrap parts. Carter nodded slowly, his eyes dropping back to the floor. The fight was completely, totally gone from him. He had been stripped bare, violently forced to realize that his entire empire, his entire identity, was built solely on the grace of the brother he so deeply despised. I'm sorry, Carter said. It was barely audible, a fragile whisper into the floorboards. Words are incredibly cheap, I told him. Show me. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the front door. Joshua, wait, Dad called out, taking a frantic step toward me. Don't just leave like this. Let's sit down. Have a drink. Let's talk about this as a family. I stopped with my hand resting on the brass doorknob. I slowly looked over my shoulder at the pale, shattered people who shared my blood. I need some serious space, I said. Don't call my phone. Don't show up at my apartment. When I am fully ready to speak to you again, I will reach out. But right now, I have a grueling shift at the warehouse tomorrow morning, and I need to get some sleep. I opened the heavy oak door and walked out into the cool, refreshing night air. I walked purposefully down the long driveway, past Carter's shiny, useless Porsche, and down the dark street to my 15-year-old Honda Civic. I unlocked the heavy door, slid into the worn driver's seat, and slammed the door shut, sealing myself securely in the quiet, safe interior. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. My hands were shaking slightly from the massive adrenaline dump, but my chest felt incredibly, unbelievably lighter than it had in a full decade. The immense, crushing weight of hiding my true self, of silently enduring the constant, biting disrespect, was completely gone. I inserted the metal key into the ignition. The old engine turned over with a familiar, deeply comforting rumble. I didn't just ruin my brother's inflated ego tonight. I successfully set myself free. I pulled away from the curb, leaving my completely shocked, devastated family behind in that house, and drove off into the bright, welcoming city lights. The first week after that explosive Friday night was the quietest my life had been in a decade. I woke up at 5 in the morning, drank my cheap instant coffee, and drove my old Honda to the shipping warehouse. The heavy physical labor, lifting crates and operating the forklift, felt different now. It was no longer a disguise or a shield against my greedy family. It was just a job I genuinely enjoyed for its simplicity. I clocked in, I did honest work, and I clocked out. There were no corporate politics, no frantic board meetings, and absolutely no arrogant tech CEOs yelling at me. My phone remained completely silent. Not a single text from my mother. No angry voicemails from my father. No condescending advice from Uncle Robert. I had drawn a massive, impenetrable boundary, and for the first time in their lives, they were terrified enough to actually respect it. But just because my phone was quiet didn't mean the world was standing still. Through Andrew, my wealth manager, I received daily, highly detailed briefings on the absolute chaos unfolding across town at Next Tech Solutions. Carter was fighting for his life and he was losing badly. The news of SV Capital Holdings pulling out had spread through the local tech sector like a raging wildfire. The industry is small, and gossip is the primary currency. By day 7 of the 30-day deadline, Carter had personally pitched to 12 different venture capital firms and private angel syndicates. Every single one of them shut the door in his face. It is a brutal reality of business that nobody wants to catch a falling knife. When a majority shareholder suddenly demands an immediate buyout, the assumption is always that the core product is fatally flawed or the CEO has committed some unforgivable fraud. Carter was forced to swallow his massive pride and beg. He went to the very same local investors he had arrogantly insulted a year prior at charity galas. He sat in their waiting rooms for hours, only to be given 5 minutes of their time before being politely escorted out by security. The universe was serving him a massive, bitter slice of humble pie, and he was choking on every bite. The immense financial pressure began fracturing his perfect, heavily curated personal life. On day 12, Andrew reported a significant development. Carter and Chloe were officially separating. The moment the bank initiated the preliminary paperwork to freeze their personal assets, Chloe's facade completely cracked. She wasn't built for the trenches. She was built for the country club. When Carter told her they had to immediately sell the sprawling estate and voluntarily surrender the leased Porsche to scrounge up any available liquid cash, she completely lost her mind. She packed 3 massive designer suitcases and moved into a luxury hotel downtown. According to Dylan, who was updating Andrew to ensure the company didn't completely implode, Chloe immediately hired a highly aggressive divorce lawyer. She started throwing around terrifying legal threats regarding the custody of their remaining shared assets, demanding her full cut before the ship sank. She wanted a massive alimony settlement from a man who was mathematically days away from total bankruptcy. The sheer irony was astounding. The woman who had loudly mocked my warehouse salary was now desperately trying to squeeze blood from a stone to maintain her country club memberships. Carter was utterly alone. By the beginning of the 3rd week, the atmosphere inside Next Tech Solutions was a waking nightmare. Carter had moved a cheap cot into his glass corner office. He was working 20 hours a day, sustained entirely by black coffee and sheer, raw panic. He fired his expensive marketing team to save cash. He personally took over the coding debugging to help Dylan. He was finally doing the actual, grueling work of a startup founder, instead of just playing the role for the cameras. Dylan confronted him on day 20. Dylan was tired, angry, and ready to walk away from the company he helped build. He walked into Carter's office and demanded to know the truth about SV Capital. He demanded to know exactly why the mysterious investor had pulled the plug so violently. Carter broke down. He sat at his desk, buried his face in his hands, and confessed everything to his co-founder. He told Dylan about the restaurant. He told him about the coffee comment. He confessed that his own brother, the man he had relentlessly mocked for years, was the brilliant financial mastermind keeping them all afloat. He admitted that his own toxic arrogance had destroyed their dream. Instead of quitting, Dylan sat down. He looked at Carter, stripped of his custom suits and his bloated ego, and saw a man who had finally hit rock bottom. Dylan agreed to stay, but only under the strict condition that Carter surrender a portion of his own voting shares to Dylan if they survived the month. Carter agreed instantly. The ego was dead. On day 28, exactly 48 hours before my lawyers would legally initiate the hostile liquidation protocols, Carter walked into the downtown offices of Sterling Ventures. He didn't know I owned Sterling. He just knew it was the massive, intimidating parent company of SV Capital Holdings. He had managed to scrape together a desperate consortium of 3 minor local investors who were willing to put up a combined $1 million. Carter had sold his house at a massive loss, liquidated his entire retirement portfolio, and sold every luxury watch he owned. But he was still $500,000 short of the $3.2 million buyout figure I had set. He was going there to beg for a 48-hour extension. He was escorted into a massive mahogany boardroom. Sitting at the head of the table wasn't me. It was Mr. Sterling himself, the senior partner and the public face of the firm. Mr. Sterling is a 60-year-old financial shark who does not tolerate fools. Carter sat down, exhausted, his hands trembling as he laid out his desperate financial spreadsheets. He practically begged Mr. Sterling for a slight extension, explaining that he had sacrificed everything he owned, his marriage, his home, his pride, to raise the capital. Mr. Sterling looked at the paperwork, then looked at Carter with eyes like chipped ice. "Mr. Carter," Sterling said, his voice echoing in the large room, "do you have any idea who you are dealing with? Do you truly understand the caliber of the man you insulted at a dinner table?" Carter looked down at his lap. "I know he is my brother. I know he is successful. I know I was a fool." Sterling leaned forward, resting his hands on the polished wood. "Your brother is not just successful. He is a ghost in this industry, and he is absolutely lethal. He built an empire from a tiny inheritance while you were playing dress-up in custom suits. But more importantly, you need to understand his underlying strategy. You are sitting here begging for an extension because you are $500,000 short of the $3.2 million buyout." "Yes, sir," Carter whispered. "I just need a little more time." "You don't need time," Sterling corrected him sharply. "You need to understand the math. When your brother instructed me to send you the buyout offer, he didn't arbitrarily pick the number 3.2 million out of thin air. He ran a comprehensive forensic audit of your entire life. He calculated the exact depreciated value of your mortgaged home. He calculated the immediate liquidation value of your personal stock portfolio. He factored in exactly how much you could reasonably raise from minority investors if you pitched perfectly. He knew exactly what you were worth." Carter looked up, his eyes widening in confusion. $3.2 million, Sterling continued, his voice dropping to a serious, commanding tone, was exactly the absolute maximum amount of liquid capital you could physically raise if you sold everything you loved and burned your ego to the ground. He didn't offer you a discount as a punishment, Carter. He mathematically calculated your exact survival threshold. He forced you to the very edge of the cliff, making you strip away every piece of fake wealth you owned, just to prove you could survive the fall. It was a calculated lifeline. The realization hit Carter like a freight train. The immense, undeniable weight of what I had done finally crushed the last remaining fragments of his pride. I hadn't tried to destroy him. I had carefully, methodically forced him to completely destroy his own toxic identity so he could rebuild himself as a real man. Carter left the Sterling Ventures building in a complete daze. He went back to his office called Dylan, and they restructured their own equity split. Carter gave Dylan enough shares to secure a personal loan from Dylan's wealthy father-in-law to cover the final $500,000. On day 29, at exactly 4 p.m., my phone rang. I was sitting in my apartment, looking out at the city skyline. It was Andrew. "Joshua," Andrew said, his voice laced with genuine respect. "The wire transfer just cleared the escrow account. $3.2 million in clean, verified funds. Next Tech Solutions has officially bought out SV Capital. They are free and clear. You are officially divested." "Thank you, Andrew," I said quietly. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Carter. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Hello, Joshua," Carter said. His voice was completely different. It wasn't the arrogant boom of a CEO. It wasn't the frantic, high-pitched panic of a dying man. It was quiet. It was incredibly heavy. It was the voice of a man who had walked through hell and survived. "I got the notification," I said. "Congratulations. You saved your company." "No," Carter corrected me immediately. "You saved my company. Twice. You saved it 4 years ago with your money. And you saved it this month by forcing me to actually earn it." I didn't say anything. I just listened to the steady sound of his breathing over the line. "I had a meeting with Mr. Sterling," Carter continued, his voice breaking slightly. "He explained the math. He explained the 3.2 million. You knew exactly what you were doing. You made me sell the house. You made me lose the car. Chloe filed the divorce papers yesterday because the money is gone. Everything I thought made me successful is completely gone. And Joshua, I have never felt better in my entire life." I smiled softly, looking at the setting sun. "Ego is a very expensive thing to maintain, Carter. It bankrupts you eventually." "I am so sorry," he said, and this time, the words carried the weight of a mountain. He wasn't apologizing to get something from me. He was apologizing because he truly, deeply meant it. "I am sorry for the dinner. I am sorry for the last 4 years. I am sorry for every single time I made you feel small so I could feel big. You are the smartest, most honorable man I know, and I treated you like dirt. I don't expect you to forgive me right now. I know it takes time, but I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I learned the lesson. Actions speak louder than apologies, Carter," I said firmly, but the anger was gone from my voice. "You have a company to run. Do it right this time. Treat your people with respect. Build something real." "I will," he promised. "Thank you, Joshua, for everything." He hung up the phone. I sat in my quiet apartment, the evening shadows stretching across the floor. The storm was finally over. The violent waves had crashed. The wreckage had been cleared. And for the first time in my life, I looked forward to the new dawn. The immediate aftermath of the buyout fundamentally reprogrammed our entire family dynamic. It was as if someone had taken the heavy, toxic rulebook we had all blindly followed for 30 years and thrown it directly into a wood chipper. My parents, who had spent decades worshiping at the altar of Carter's flashy, superficial success, were forced to take a long, incredibly uncomfortable look in the mirror. They realized their blatant favoritism hadn't just deeply hurt me. It had actively enabled a monster in Carter. They didn't call me for 2 full weeks. When Mom finally did reach out, she didn't ask for a single favor. She just asked if I would be willing to meet them for a quiet cup of coffee at a local diner. No expensive restaurants. No dressing up to impress the waiters. Just a quiet booth in the back. We met and they apologized. It was awkward, it was painful, and it was necessary. I told them I loved them, but the boundary I set on that Friday night was permanent. I would never be their financial safety net. I would never fund a luxurious retirement. I would pay for their medical care if they ever truly needed it, but my money was my own. They agreed without a single argument. They had learned to fear the quiet sun. Uncle Robert tried to corner me at a family barbecue 2 months later. He had a shiny new folder containing a business proposal for a chain of automated car washes. He tried to pitch me near the grill, putting his arm around my shoulder with his old, familiar bluster. I didn't even look at the folder. I just looked him dead in the eye and said, "Uncle Robert, if you ever try to pitch me a business idea at a family event again, I will buy your failing hardware store through a proxy firm, liquidate the inventory, and turn the building into a parking lot." He turned pale, slowly backed away, and never mentioned business to me ever again. My sister Emily was the only one who approached the new reality correctly. She called me a few months later, very hesitant and respectful. She didn't ask for a handout. She asked if I would be willing to sit down and teach her how to properly set up a college fund for her 2 young children. She wanted to know how I compounded my original inheritance. I spent 3 hours with her at my kitchen table, drawing out charts, explaining index funds, and teaching her the brutal discipline of long-term investing. It was the best conversation we had ever had. A full year passed. Next Tech Solutions didn't just survive the crisis. It thrived. Stripped of his massive ego and his toxic wife, Carter became an entirely different leader. He listened to Dylan. He respected his junior employees. He stopped wasting corporate capital on ridiculous marketing stunts and focused entirely on the core software. The industry noticed the radical shift in the company's culture and stability. Exactly 14 months after the explosive family dinner, Next Tech Solutions officially went public. It wasn't a world-shattering billion-dollar Silicon Valley IPO. It was a modest, highly successful, and incredibly stable public offering. The stock opened strong and held its value. Carter, even with his significantly reduced equity stake, became a very wealthy man again. But this time it was real wealth. It was earned. It was solid ground, not a fragile house of cards built on my secret money. To celebrate the successful IPO, Carter rented out a private room at a nice, understated steakhouse downtown. He invited the entire founding team, Dylan's family, our parents, Emily, and me. I wore a simple, clean suit. Nothing flashy. I drove my old Honda Civic and parked it between a row of expensive sedans. When I walked into the private room, the atmosphere was genuinely warm. There was no tension. There was no posturing. After the main course was cleared, Carter stood up at the head of the table. He picked up his glass of sparkling water. He had stopped drinking alcohol entirely after the divorce. The room quieted down as he looked around the table. "A year ago," Carter started, his voice steady and calm, "I was a complete fraud. I had a big house, a fast car, and an ego that crushed anyone who got too close. I thought I was a genius who built an empire entirely by himself. I was arrogant, I was cruel, and I was dangerously blind." He looked directly at Mom and Dad. "I want to thank my parents for supporting me, but more importantly, I want to thank them for giving me the brother I have." Carter turned his gaze to me. The entire room shifted their attention to where I sat quietly at the end of the table. "I am standing here today, the CEO of a successful public company, solely because of Joshua," Carter said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "He didn't just give me the initial seed money to survive when everyone else turned their backs. He gave me the hardest, most painful, and most necessary lesson of my entire life. He completely tore down the fake world I lived in, forcing me to build a real one. He showed me that true wealth isn't what you drive. It's what you can endure when everything is taken away from you." Carter raised his glass high. "To Joshua, the smartest investor I will ever know, the toughest teacher I ever had, and the brother I should have appreciated from the very beginning. To Joshua," the table echoed softly, raising their glasses. I smiled, nodded my head slightly in acknowledgement, and took a sip of my water. It was a good moment. It was a healing moment. But it didn't change who I fundamentally was. The very next morning, my alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. I rolled out of bed, put on my faded jeans, my plain t-shirt, and my scuffed steel-toed boots. I drove my dented Honda through the dark, quiet streets of the city to the logistics warehouse. Just last week, the warehouse manager had pulled me into his cramped office. He offered me a promotion to a regional supervisor position, complete with a bump in salary and a company truck. I politely turned it down. I told him I liked the physical labor on the floor. I liked the absolute simplicity of moving a heavy box from point A to point B. It kept my mind sharp, my body strong, and my ego completely grounded in reality. I clocked in at exactly 5 a.m. Before heading to the loading docks, I stopped at the small coffee cart parked near the employee entrance. The barista, an older guy named Sal, smiled when he saw me. "The usual, Josh?" Sal asked, wiping down the counter. "Yeah, Sal, the usual," I replied. He handed me a large, steaming cup of premium dark roast coffee. Cost exactly $8. I handed him a $10 bill and told him to keep the change. I walked out to the loading bay, feeling the cold morning air hit my face. I took a long, slow sip of the hot coffee. Tasted incredible. Tasted like freedom. Tasted like absolute peace. I looked out at the rising sun painting the city skyline in shades of gold and orange. I had $80 million sitting in heavily diversified, secure accounts. I had an entire family that finally respected me. I had a brother who had learned how to be a real human being. And I had a quiet, simple life that I absolutely loved. Success looks incredibly different for everyone. It took my family a lifetime of mistakes, a brutal financial collapse, and a terrifying reality check to finally learn that lesson. But they learned it, and I was finally free to just be myself. Now, I want to take a moment to speak directly to all of you watching this. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal isn't about how to make millions of dollars in the stock market, and it certainly isn't about the mechanics of a corporate buyout. The real lesson is about the immense, dangerous illusion of modern success. We live in a world that constantly begs us to judge a book by its incredibly shiny cover. We are taught to respect the man in the custom suit and pity the man in the dirty work boots. But true power, real, unshakable power, is silent. It doesn't need to scream for attention at a birthday dinner. It doesn't need to belittle others to feel tall. True wealth is the absolute freedom to be exactly who you are, without requiring the validation of anyone else around you. My brother almost lost his soul chasing the applause of strangers, and it took losing everything for him to finally find his character. Never let anyone dictate your worth based on your job title or your bank account. And never, ever underestimate the quiet person sitting at the end of the table. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. What was your favorite perspective or the most meaningful takeaway from this story? Let me know down in the comments below. Or, if this story simply resonated with you and you appreciate the lesson, just comment the word good, so I know you were here with me until the very end. Your interaction means the world to me and helps push these important stories out to more people who might need to hear them today. Thank you for watching.